The white roses trembled in Arya Lakeside's hands as she stood before the mahogany doors of her lakefront mansion, their pristine petals catching the late afternoon sunlight that cascaded across Lake Michigan's restless surface. After 3 grueling days at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, recovering from emergency appendectomy surgery, Arya had anticipated nothing more than the sanctuary of her own bed, and perhaps a quiet evening with her husband River and their 10-year-old daughter Hope. The bouquet of 24 roses had arrived at the hospital that morning, accompanied by a note penned in River's distinctive handwriting. "Welcome home, my love. Our sanctuary awaits you." The brass handle turned beneath her palm with the familiar weight of coming home. Arya stepped across the threshold into the marble foyer, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across walls, adorned with her architectural awards and Hope's watercolor paintings. The house felt different somehow, charged with an energy she could not immediately identify. Perhaps it was merely the disorientation that followed any hospital stay, the way familiar spaces seemed foreign after days of sterile white rooms and antiseptic corridors. "River," she called softly, her voice echoing through the grand foyer. "Hope, sweetheart." Silence greeted her, save for the distant sound of laughter drifting from somewhere upstairs. Arya smiled, imagining her husband and daughter perhaps preparing some sort of welcome surprise. River had always possessed a flair for romantic gestures, and Hope inherited his theatrical tendencies alongside Arya's analytical mind. The Italian marble staircase curved elegantly toward the second floor, each step a masterpiece of craftsmanship that Arya had personally selected during the mansion's renovation 5 years earlier. She climbed slowly, still tender from surgery, one hand trailing along the brass banister while the other clutched the roses. The laughter grew louder as she ascended, accompanied by voices she recognized but could not quite place in this context. River's deep baritone carried clearly through the hallway, punctuated by feminine laughter that definitely did not belong to 10-year-old Hope. Arya paused at the top of the stairs, confusion creasing her brow. Perhaps River was conducting business from home, though it seemed unusual for him to entertain clients in their private quarters. The master bedroom door stood slightly ajar, warm golden light spilling across the Persian runner that led down the hallway. Arya approached slowly, the roses beginning to feel heavy in her grip. Through the gap, she could see movement within their sanctuary, shadows dancing against walls painted in the soft cream color she had selected to complement the lake view. "River?" she called again, reaching for the crystal doorknob. The door swung open to reveal a scene that would forever fracture her understanding of love, trust, and the life she had built over 13 years of marriage. River lay entangled in their silk sheets with Belle Riverside, the 28-year-old interior designer who had worked on their summer home in Lake Forest. Belle's platinum blonde hair spilled across Arya's monogrammed pillows, while River's hands traced patterns on skin that was not his wife's. The white roses fell from Arya's numb fingers, cascading to the floor like snow against the dark hardwood. The sound of their impact seemed to echo through the room with the finality of a gavel striking wood. River's head snapped toward the doorway, his face draining of color as their eyes met across the wreckage of their marriage. "Arya," he whispered, scrambling to cover himself with sheets that had been their marriage bed for over a decade. Belle made no such effort at modesty. Instead, she rose from the bed with the languid grace of a cat, gathering her scattered clothing with deliberate slowness. Her ice-blue eyes met Arya's, with something that resembled triumph rather than shame. "Hello, Arya," Belle said, her voice carrying the casual tone one might use when encountering an acquaintance at the grocery store. "River mentioned you might be coming home today." The words hit Arya like physical blows. The casual acknowledgement that her return had been anticipated, discussed, perhaps even planned around, suggested a level of intimacy and coordination that transcended a moment of weakness. This was not a mistake or a lapse in judgment. This was a relationship, conducted in her absence within the walls of her own home. Arya felt her knees buckle, the combination of post-surgical weakness and emotional shock overwhelming her system. She grasped the doorframe for support, her heart monitor from the hospital still attached to her chest beneath her blouse, now emitting urgent beeps as her pulse skyrocketed. "How long?" she managed to whisper, though part of her already knew the answer would devastate whatever remained of her world. River had extracted himself from the bed and was reaching for his clothes, his movements frantic and graceless. "Arya, please, let me explain." "How long?" she repeated, her voice gaining strength even as her body weakened. Belle stepped between them, now fully dressed in the designer outfit that had been carelessly discarded on Arya's bedroom floor. "Does it really matter?" she asked, her tone suggesting boredom with the entire situation. "What matters is that River has finally realized what he needs. Someone who understands his world, his ambitions, someone who doesn't spend her days buried in blueprints and building projects." The cruelty of the words, delivered with such casual precision, caused something fundamental to break inside Arya's chest. Not just her heart, though that organ felt as though it were physically cracking, but something deeper. Her faith in the future they had planned, the home they had built, the family they had created together. "Get out," Arya whispered, her voice barely audible. "Arya, please," River began, but she cut him off with a look that could have frozen Lake Michigan in July. "Get out of my house," she said, louder now, her architect's training lending authority to her voice even in devastation. "Both of you, get out of my house right now." Belle collected her purse from the dresser, her movements unhurried despite the explosive tension filling the room. As she passed Arya in the doorway, she paused, leaning close enough that her words were audible only to the woman whose life she had just destroyed. "He was never really yours anyway," Belle whispered. "Men like River need women who can match their ambition, not domesticate it. Thank you for keeping him company until the right woman came along." The words hit their mark with surgical precision. Arya stumbled backward into the hallway, her vision blurring as Belle's heels clicked across the marble floor toward the stairs. River followed, calling her name, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. The heart monitor's beeping grew more urgent as Arya slid down the wall to sit among the scattered white roses, their broken stems and bruised petals surrounding her like the remnants of every dream she had ever dared to build. Through the window, Lake Michigan stretched endlessly toward the horizon, its waters the same steel gray as the storm clouds gathering overhead. As consciousness began to fade at the edges, Arya's final coherent thought was not of River or Belle, but of her 10-year-old daughter Hope, who would soon come home to find their family shattered beyond recognition. Chapter 2. The Matriarch's Arrival. Grace Lakeside received the call at precisely 11:37 in the evening. Her phone, cutting through the silence of her Detroit penthouse like a blade through silk. "Mrs. Lakeside." The voice belonged to a nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. "Your daughter Arya has been readmitted. She collapsed at home and is currently stable, but she's asking for you." Grace had lived 62 years on this earth, had presided over countless courtroom dramas as a federal judge, had weathered her own husband's death and raised Arya as a single mother. She had believed herself prepared for any crisis life might deliver, yet something in the nurse's carefully neutral tone suggested circumstances that transcended medical emergency. Within 20 minutes, Grace was behind the wheel of her midnight blue Bentley Continental, the city lights of Detroit becoming distant stars in her rearview mirror as she navigated toward Chicago. The leather steering wheel felt solid beneath her manicured hands, grounding her as her mind raced through possibilities, each scenario more troubling than the last. The 3-hour drive passed in a blur of interstate highways and urgent thoughts. Grace had spoken to Arya just that morning, her daughter's voice bright with anticipation of returning home after surgery. Something had happened in the intervening hours, something significant enough to send Arya back to the emergency room despite her medical clearance. Grace arrived at the hospital as dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold above Lake Michigan. She found Arya in a private room, connected to monitors that beeped softly in the pre-dawn quiet. Her daughter's face, usually animated with intelligence and purpose, appeared carved from marble, beautiful but lifeless. "Sweetheart," Grace whispered, settling into the bedside chair with the grace that had earned her reputation as one of Detroit's most formidable jurists. Arya's eyes opened slowly, focusing on her mother's face with visible effort. "Mama," she whispered, using the childhood name she had abandoned in adolescence. "He was with her, in our bed, in our home." The words required no elaboration. Grace had suspected River Northbrook was not worthy of her brilliant daughter from the moment Arya had introduced him 13 years earlier. The man possessed charm and ambition in equal measure, but Grace had sensed something hollow beneath the polished exterior, a weakness that would eventually surface under pressure. "Tell me everything," Grace said, her voice carrying the authority that had commanded respect in federal courtrooms across the Midwest. Arya's account emerged in fragments, each detail falling like stones into still water, creating ripples that would eventually become waves. Belle Riverside, the casual cruelty, the suggestion that River had never truly belonged to Arya at all. With each revelation, Grace felt her protective instincts sharpen into something approaching fury. "Where is Hope?" Grace asked when Arya finished speaking. "River's sister took her for the night when the ambulance came. She doesn't know yet." Arya's voice broke on the words. "How do I tell my 10-year-old daughter that everything she believes about family is a lie?" Grace reached for her daughter's hand, finding it cold despite the warm hospital room. "You tell her the truth, carefully and with love. But first we ensure that this betrayal becomes the best thing that ever happened to you." Something flickered in Arya's dark eyes, a spark that had been absent since Grace's arrival. "What do you mean?" "I mean that River Northbrook has just made the most catastrophic mistake of his life. He has underestimated the women of this family." Grace's smile held no warmth, only precision. "Your great-grandmother built a hotel empire after her husband abandoned her for his secretary. Your grandmother turned her divorce settlement into a telecommunications fortune, and I transformed my own husband's betrayal into a judicial career that changed Michigan law." Grace stood, moving to the window where Chicago's skyline caught the morning sun. "River believes he has chosen the stronger woman. He is about to discover exactly how wrong that assumption truly is." "I don't understand," Arya said, struggling to sit up in the hospital bed. "You will," Grace replied, turning back to face her daughter. "But first, you need to heal. Not just from surgery, but from the illusion that you needed River Northbrook to complete your life. You are Arya Lakeside, one of Chicago's most respected architects. You designed the cultural center renovation that won international acclaim. You are the daughter of a federal judge and the mother of a remarkable little girl who inherited your intelligence and strength." Grace returned to the bedside chair, leaning forward with the intensity that had made opposing attorneys tremble. "River and his little accomplice believe they have destroyed you. Instead, they have freed you to become exactly who you were meant to be." "I don't feel strong," Arya admitted. "I feel broken." Broken things can be rebuilt stronger than before, Grace said. Ask any architect. The door opened to admit a nurse carrying a breakfast tray, followed by a small figure that launched itself toward the hospital bed with determined purpose. Hope Northbrook, still wearing the purple pajamas she had slept in at her aunt's house, climbed carefully onto the bed beside her mother. "Mama, why are you back in the hospital?" Hope asked, her 10-year-old voice carrying wisdom beyond her years. "Aunt Rebecca said you got sick again, but you look sad, not sick." Grace watched her granddaughter with fresh eyes, noting the intelligent assessment in Hope's gaze, the way she positioned herself protectively next to Arya despite not understanding the full situation. This child was not merely River's daughter or Arya's child. She was a lakeside woman in training. "Sometimes grown-ups face difficult situations," Arya said carefully, stroking Hope's dark curls. "Is it about Daddy and that blonde lady?" Hope asked with devastating directness. The silence that followed stretched taut as a wire. Grace felt her pulse quicken as she realized the implications of her granddaughter's question. "What blonde lady, sweetheart?" Arya asked, her voice carefully controlled. Hope's expression grew troubled, as though she had said something wrong. "The one who comes to our house sometimes when you're at work. She drives a white car and has really long hair. Daddy said she was helping with decorating, but she never brought any decorating stuff." Grace and Arya exchanged a look across the hospital bed, a wordless communication that conveyed both heartbreak and determination. River's betrayal ran deeper than a moment of weakness. It was a calculated deception that had been conducted under their own roof, witnessed by their innocent child. "How long has this lady been coming to the house?" Grace asked gently. Hope considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "Since before Christmas, maybe longer. She came to my birthday party in March, but she left when you got home from work early." 6 months, possibly longer. Grace felt something crystallize inside her chest, a resolve that had been building since Arya's first broken words in the hospital room. River Northbrook had not merely betrayed his wife. He had corrupted their home, exposed their child to deception, and demonstrated a level of disrespect that demanded consequences. "Hope," Grace said, her voice gentle but purposeful, "would you like to come stay with your mother and me for a while? We could have adventures together, just the three of us." Hope's face brightened for the first time since entering the room. "Like a sleepover that lasts for days?" "Exactly like that," Grace confirmed, meeting Arya's questioning gaze with a look that promised explanations later. As Hope chatted excitedly about the possibilities of extended grandmother time, Grace began forming plans that would transform her family's devastation into victory. River Northbrook had chosen to wage war against the lakeside women. He was about to discover that he had selected the wrong battlefield entirely. The game, as they said in federal court, was now officially afoot. Chapter 3. 3 Hearts, 1 Mission. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Arya's hospital room, casting geometric patterns across the sterile white floors as 3 generations of lakeside women sat in contemplative silence. Hope had fallen asleep curled against her mother's side, her small hand clutching Arya's hospital gown with the fierce protectiveness of a child who sensed that her world had shifted in ways she could not yet understand. Grace occupied the bedside chair with the regal bearing that had intimidated attorneys and defendants alike during her distinguished judicial career, her silver hair catching the light like a crown. "We need to discuss practical matters," Grace said quietly, her voice pitched low enough not to disturb Hope's sleep. "The immediate future, financial security, and how we protect this child from the worst of what's coming." Arya nodded, her architect's mind already beginning to compartmentalize the crisis into manageable components. "River and I have joint accounts. Joint ownership of the house, joint custody arrangements, everything is entangled. Not for long, Grace replied with the certainty of someone who had spent decades untangling complex legal situations. I've already contacted Margaret Chen at Fitzgerald Morrison and Associates. She's the finest family attorney in Chicago, and she owes me several favors from cases where I provided federal precedent research. Mother, I can't think about divorce proceedings yet. This just happened. This has been happening for months. Grace interrupted gently but firmly. Hope's revelations make that clear. River and Belle have been planning their future while you built architectural dreams and recovered from surgery. We cannot afford to be reactive when they have been strategic. Hope stirred against Arya's side, mumbling something in her sleep about art supplies and garden parties. Grace studied her granddaughter's peaceful face, noting the determined set of her jaw even in slumber. She knows more than she's told us, Grace observed. Children always do. They see patterns that adults miss because they haven't learned to rationalize away their instincts. What do you mean? Grace leaned forward, her expression growing thoughtful. Hope asked specifically about that blonde lady, not a lady or some woman. She's been observing Belle Riverside for months, probably cataloguing details without understanding their significance. Children are natural investigators when their security feels threatened. The door opened to admit Dr. Patricia Harrison, Arya's surgeon, carrying a chart and wearing the kind of expression that suggested good news. Mrs. Northbrook, your latest test results are excellent. No complications from yesterday's episode, and your surgical recovery remains on track. I see no medical reason to keep you here longer. Thank you, Dr. Harrison, Arya replied, though her voice lacked enthusiasm for release. After the doctor left, Grace stood and moved to the window overlooking the lake. You're afraid to go home, she said without turning around. Wouldn't you be? Arya asked. That house holds 13 years of memories, and now they're all contaminated. Every room, every piece of furniture, every family photograph, it all feels like evidence of my own blindness. Hope opened her eyes at the sound of voices, immediately alert in the way of children who had learned to monitor adult conversations for signs of trouble. Are we going home now? She asked. We're going to your house, Grace said, returning to her chair with decision crystallizing in her movements. All three of us, together. But Grandma Grace, you live in Detroit, Hope pointed out with 10-year-old logic. Not anymore, Grace replied, meeting Arya's startled gaze with determination. I've decided to take early retirement from the federal bench. Chicago has always felt more like home than Detroit anyway, especially now. Mother, you can't abandon your career because of my marriage problems. I'm not abandoning anything, Grace said firmly. I'm choosing to be where my family needs me most. Besides, there are several prestigious law firms in Chicago that would welcome a former federal judge as senior counsel. Margaret Chen has already extended informal overtures. Hope sat up straighter, her eyes brightening with the possibility of extended grandmother presence. You could live with us. We have lots of rooms, and you could help me with my homework, and we could cook together like when I visit Detroit. Exactly what I was thinking, Grace said, winking at her granddaughter. Though I suspect we'll need to make some changes to the living arrangements. Arya understood immediately. River will need to find alternative accommodations while we sort through this situation, Grace confirmed. The house is jointly owned, but I suspect your attorney will find grounds for temporary exclusive occupancy given the circumstances of your medical emergency. Can we do that legally? Grace's smile held edges sharp enough to cut glass. Arya, sweetheart, you're talking to someone who spent 30 years interpreting federal law. Trust me when I say that River's behavior provides multiple legal footholds for ensuring your comfort and security during these proceedings. Hope had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention she usually reserved for art projects and nature documentaries. "Daddy did something really bad, didn't he?" she said with devastating directness. Grace and Arya exchanged another of their wordless communications before Grace answered. "Your father made choices that hurt your mother very badly," she said carefully. "When grown-ups make those kinds of choices, there are consequences." "Will I still get to see him?" "Of course you will," Arya said quickly, stroking Hope's hair. "Whatever happens between your father and me, he will always be your father." "But things will be different," Hope said with the resignation of a child who had already begun adjusting to a new reality. "Yes," Grace said honestly. "Things will be different. But different doesn't necessarily mean worse. Sometimes different means discovering that you're stronger and happier than you ever imagined possible." Hope considered this philosophy with the seriousness she brought to all important concepts, like when you rearrange your room and find a better place for everything. "Exactly like that," Grace confirmed, though her smile suggested that this particular rearrangement would involve considerably more complexity than bedroom furniture. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation, followed by the appearance of a nurse carrying discharge papers and a wheelchair. "Mrs. Northbrook, we're ready to process your release whenever you're prepared to leave." Grace stood with the authority of someone accustomed to taking charge of difficult situations. "We'll need a few minutes to gather our things and make some phone calls." After the nurse left, Grace pulled out her phone with purposeful movements. "Margaret Chen first, then a locksmith, then a moving company to collect my essentials from Detroit. Mother, this is happening very fast." River and Belle had months to plan their strategy, Grace replied, already dialing. "We have the advantage of righteous anger and superior intelligence. Speed is our ally now." Hope climbed down from the hospital bed and moved to the window where Grace had stood earlier. "Look," she said, pressing her nose against the glass. "You can see our house from here." Arya and Grace joined her at the window, following Hope's pointing finger to the distant lakefront, where their mansion sat among similar palatial homes, its windows catching the afternoon sun like jewels. "It looks so small from here," Hope observed. "Houses always look smaller when you see them from a distance," Arya said. "But they're the same size when you get close." Hope turned to look at her mother with eyes that seemed older than her 10 years. "Maybe we'll look different to it too." Grace felt something shift in her chest as she studied her granddaughter's profile against the window. This child possessed wisdom that would serve her well in the challenges ahead. More importantly, she possessed the lakeside resilience that had carried 3 generations of women through crisis into triumph. "Yes," Grace said softly, "I think we will look very different indeed." As Grace began making phone calls to initiate the legal and logistical machinery that would transform their lives, Arya found herself studying the distant mansion with new eyes. River had given her an unexpected gift in his betrayal. He had freed her from the obligation to preserve a marriage that had been built on unequal foundations, and he had brought Grace back into their daily lives. Most importantly, he had revealed the strength that existed in the bond between 3 generations of lakeside women, a strength that would prove far more powerful than any man's temporary affection. The war for their future was about to begin, and River Northbrook had no idea how thoroughly outmatched he truly was. Chapter 4. The Garden of Secrets. The lakeside mansion looked exactly the same as they approached in Grace's Bentley, its limestone facade glowing warmly in the afternoon. Sun, the perfectly manicured gardens displaying the last blooms of late summer, yet everything had changed. Hope pressed her face against the back-seat window, her breath fogging the glass as she studied their home with new eyes. "It looks like a museum now," she said thoughtfully. "Pretty but not alive." Grace parked in the circular driveway, noting immediately that River's silver Porsche was absent from its usual place in the four-car garage. "Good," she murmured. Margaret worked quickly. The attorney had indeed worked with impressive efficiency. Within 3 hours of Grace's initial phone call, River had been served with papers granting Aria temporary exclusive occupancy of the marital home pending formal proceedings. He had also been provided with a list of Chicago's finest hotels, courtesy of Margaret's assistant. "Where will Daddy sleep tonight?" Hope asked as they gathered their belongings from the car. "At the Four Seasons downtown," Grace replied matter-of-factly. "Very comfortable accommodations. Many businessmen prefer hotel living during transitional periods." Aria used her key to unlock the front door, stepping across the threshold with the strange sensation of entering a space that was both intimately familiar and completely foreign. The marble foyer gleamed under the crystal chandelier. Her architectural awards still lined the walls alongside Hope's artwork, yet the house felt hollow, like a beautiful shell from which all life had departed. "I'll check the security system and ensure all locks are changed by tomorrow," Grace said immediately, moving into organizational mode. "Hope, sweetheart, why don't you show me where you think I should set up my temporary office?" Hope's face brightened at being given important responsibility. "The sunroom. It has the best light, and you can see the garden while you work." As Hope led Grace toward the back of the house, chattering excitedly about the advantages of various rooms, Aria found herself alone in the foyer where scattered white rose petals still marked the spot where her marriage had shattered the previous day. The housekeeper had swept away most of the debris, but a few bruised petals remained lodged against the baseboards, their edges brown with age. Aria knelt and gathered these remnants, holding them in her palm like evidence of a crime. The roses had been beautiful when River sent them to the hospital, perfect symbols of love and homecoming. Now they seemed like prophecy, their inevitable decay a metaphor for everything she had believed permanent. "Mama?" Hope's voice carried from the kitchen. "Grandma Grace wants to know if we have chamomile tea." "Top shelf, left cabinet," Aria called back, rising and disposing of the rose petals in a crystal bowl on the entryway table. She would deal with them later, along with everything else that needed to be sorted, catalogued, and decided upon. The kitchen felt more welcoming than the formal spaces, its warm wood cabinets and granite countertops bearing the comfortable wear of daily family life. Grace stood at the island, examining the contents of several tea canisters with the methodical approach she brought to all tasks. "Hope tells me you have a spectacular garden," Grace said, nodding toward the French doors that led to the back terrace. "She thinks it might be therapeutic for you to spend time there while you recover." Through the glass, Aria could see her prized rose garden, where dozens of varieties bloomed in carefully planned succession throughout the growing season. She had designed the space herself, creating distinct areas for different purposes: a formal parterre near the house, a cottage garden section with climbing roses and perennials, and a cutting garden that provided flowers for the house throughout summer and fall. "I haven't been out there since before the surgery," Aria admitted. "Mrs. Patterson from next door has been watering everything, but I should check on things." "We should all check on things," Grace said firmly. "Fresh air and physical activity aid recovery, and Hope could probably use some outdoor time after yesterday's upheaval." Hope bounced on her toes with enthusiasm. "Can we have a tea party in the garden, like in England?" "I think that's a wonderful idea," Grace said, loading a tray with teacups, the chamomile tea, and a plate of shortbread cookies from the pantry. "Lead the way, ladies." The garden greeted them with the kind of beauty that takes years to achieve, where careful planning and patient cultivation create an appearance of effortless abundance. Late-season roses climbed arbors and spilled over stone walls, their fragrance mixing with the sharp green scent of boxwood hedges and the sweet perfume of jasmine that grew along the back fence. Hope immediately ran toward her favorite spot, a small gazebo tucked among the climbing roses where she often sat to read or draw. "Look, Mrs. Patterson picked all the dead flowers like you taught her." Arya followed more slowly, noting the meticulous care their neighbor had provided. Every plant showed signs of proper attention. No brown edges on leaves, no spent blooms left to drain energy from new growth, no weeds disturbing the careful arrangement of colors and textures. Grace settled onto a wrought-iron bench positioned to catch the afternoon sun, setting the tea tray on a matching table. "This is spectacular, Arya. You created something truly magical here." "It was supposed to be Hope's legacy," Arya said, settling beside her mother. "A place where she could bring her own children someday, where multiple generations could gather and feel connected to something permanent." "It still can be," Grace said gently. "Gardens survive changes in ownership, changes in family structure. The roses don't care who tends them, as long as someone does it with love." Hope appeared at Arya's elbow, carrying a small garden journal bound in green leather. "I found this hidden under the bench in the gazebo," she said, holding it out to her mother. "Is it yours?" Arya took the journal with growing confusion. The leather was unfamiliar, the binding too new to belong to her gardening records. She opened to the first page and found handwriting that definitely did not belong to her or any member of their household staff. "What does it say?" Grace asked, noting Arya's expression. Arya read silently for a moment, her face growing pale. "It's Belle's," she said finally. "She's been keeping notes about our family, our routines, our household schedule." Grace leaned closer as Arya read aloud from entries dated over the past 6 months. March 15th. Arya works late on Tuesdays and Thursdays. R says she often doesn't return until after Hope's bedtime. Perfect opportunity for longer visits. April 3rd. Hope's birthday party. Left before Arya returned from office. Must remember to avoid family events until R makes the transition. May 20th. R showed me Arya's architectural plans for the community center. Boring domestic projects. He needs someone who understands his vision for real estate empire. June 8th. Discussed timeline with R. He agrees that waiting until after. Arya's surgery makes sense. She'll be vulnerable, easier to handle. The journal fell from Arya's hands as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. This had not been a casual affair or moment of weakness. Belle and River had been conducting surveillance on her family, planning their strategy, waiting for the optimal moment to detonate her life. Hope picked up the journal and flipped through. Additional pages, her young face growing increasingly troubled. "There are drawings, too," she said softly. "Pictures of our house, of your office, of me." Grace took the journal with the careful precision of someone handling evidence, her judicial training immediately recognizing the legal implications of what they had discovered. "This documents premeditation," she said grimly. "Deliberate invasion of your privacy, manipulation of your family dynamics, and calculated timing to maximize emotional damage." "She was studying us," Arya whispered, "like specimens in a laboratory." "She was gathering intelligence," Grace corrected. "But intelligence works both ways." Belle made a critical error by documenting her activities. This journal is now evidence of systematic deception and possibly stalking behavior. Hope sat cross-legged on the grass, still paging through Belle's observations with the fascination of someone decoding a mystery. "She got lots of things wrong, though," Hope said. "She says I'm shy and clingy, but I'm not. And she says you cry when Daddy travels for business, but you don't. You read architecture books and plan projects, Grace smiled at her granddaughter's astute analysis. What else did she get wrong? Hope continued reading with growing confidence. She thinks our house is too big and cold, but it's not cold at all. It's warm and full of good smells from cooking and flowers. And she says Daddy seems bored with family life, but he helps me with math homework and builds blanket forts. Aria felt something shift inside her chest as she listened to Hope's defense of their family life. Through a 10-year-old's eyes, Belle's observations revealed more about the observer than the observed. Belle had seen only surface details, missing the deeper currents of love and connection that actually defined their household. She doesn't understand us at all, Hope concluded, with satisfaction. She thinks she's smart, but she's really not. Grace stood and moved to examine a climbing rose that had twined itself around a wooden trellis near the gazebo. Hope is absolutely right, she said. Belle fundamentally misunderstood what she was observing because she lacks the capacity to recognize genuine family bonds. What do you mean? Aria asked. She saw your work schedule as neglect, rather than dedication to providing for your family. She interpreted your independence as emotional distance rather than strength. She mistook River's contentment with domestic life as boredom rather than satisfaction. Grace turned back to face them. Belle's journal reveals her own limitations more clearly than it exposes any weakness in your family. Hope had moved on to examining the sketches Belle had made of their property, her artistic eye immediately noting flaws in perspective and proportion. "These drawings are terrible," she announced. "She can't even draw our house right. The windows are all wrong, and she forgot the fountain." Aria joined Hope on the grass, studying Belle's artistic attempts with professional interest. "You're right, these aren't accurate representations at all. They're more like impressions, filtered through her own perceptions." "Or delusions," Grace added dryly. As the afternoon progressed into early evening, the three women continued dissecting. Belle's journal like archaeologists examining artifacts from an alien civilization. Each entry revealed new layers of miscalculation and misunderstanding, building a case that Belle's victory might prove far more Pyrrhic than she had anticipated. "She thinks she won," Hope said, as Grace poured second cups of chamomile tea in. "The gathering dusk. But she only won Daddy, and Daddy isn't even the best part of our family." Grace and Aria exchanged a look of amazement at Hope's devastating assessment. "What is the best part?" Grace asked gently. Hope gestured toward the garden around them, the house glowing warmly in the background, the three generations sitting together among roses that had survived countless seasons of change. "This," she said simply, "us. We're the best part, and she can't have any of it." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky above Lake Michigan, Grace realized that Belle Riverside had indeed made a catastrophic miscalculation. She had stolen a man who had never truly understood the value of what he was abandoning. And, in doing so, she had inadvertently revealed the unshakable strength of the women he left behind. The game was far from over, but the first major victory belonged entirely to the Lakeside legacy. Chapter 5. The Legacy Box. The morning light filtering through the master bedroom's French doors felt different somehow, as though the events of the past 48 hours had altered the very quality of illumination within the lakefront mansion. Grace stood before Aria's walk-in closet, her experienced eye cataloguing the extensive wardrobe with the analytical precision she had once applied to legal briefs and courtroom evidence. Silk blouses hung beside tailored jackets, designer gowns shared space with comfortable weekend attire, and an impressive collection of architectural conference outfits suggested a woman who dressed for success in a traditionally male profession. "You have excellent taste," Grace observed, as Arya emerged from the bathroom, moving more easily now that the post-surgical tenderness was beginning to fade. "But I suspect you've been dressing to accommodate River's preferences rather than your own." Arya paused in the act of selecting clothes for the day, considering her mother's assessment. "What do you mean?" "Conservative colors, traditional silhouettes. Nothing too bold or attention-grabbing," Grace said, running her fingers along a row of navy and charcoal blazers. "The wardrobe of a woman who has learned to minimize her own light so as not to outshine her husband." Before Arya could respond, Hope appeared in the doorway, carrying a lacquered wooden box that required both her small hands to manage safely. "Grandma Grace, I found this in the guest room where you slept. It has your initials on it." Grace turned, her expression softening as she recognized the cedar chest she had transported from Detroit. "That's my legacy box, sweetheart. My grandmother gave it to me when I graduated from law school, and her grandmother gave it to her when she started her first business." Hope set the box carefully on the bed, her artistic eye immediately drawn to the intricate brass inlay work that decorated the lid. "What's inside?" "Family history," Grace said, settling beside the box with reverent movements. "The stories of lakeside women who faced impossible situations and transformed them into triumphs." Arya joined them on the bed, drawn by the promise of family mythology she had heard in fragments throughout her childhood, but never experienced in complete narrative form. Grace lifted the lid to reveal treasures that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Antique jewelry, yellowed photographs, handwritten letters tied with ribbon, and official documents that bore the weight of significant life changes. "This belonged to your great-great-grandmother, Constance Lakeside," Grace said, lifting a strand of pearls that caught the morning sun like captured moonlight. "She wore them the day she signed the papers to purchase her first hotel after her husband abandoned her for his secretary in 1923. Hope leaned closer, her 10-year-old fingers reaching out to touch the pearls with appropriate reverence. "Was she sad?" "I'm sure she was," Grace replied honestly. "But sadness didn't stop her from building an empire that supported 3 generations of our family. By the time she died in 1967, she owned 17 hotels across the Midwest." Grace continued unpacking the box, each item carrying its own story of feminine resilience. A simple gold wedding band that belonged to Arya's great-grandmother, who had transformed her divorce settlement into a telecommunications fortune during the 1950s. A fountain pen used to sign the papers that established Grace's own legal practice after her husband's death left her a widow with a young daughter to support. "And this," Grace said, lifting a small velvet pouch, "contains something very special indeed." She opened the pouch to reveal an engagement ring that seemed to capture and concentrate all the light in the room. The central diamond was modest by contemporary standards, perhaps 2 carats, but the setting was extraordinary. An intricate Art Deco design that spoke of craftsmanship from an era when jewelry was created as heirloom art. "Constance's engagement ring," Grace explained, "but not from the husband who betrayed her. This was given to her by the man she married after she had established her independence, after she knew her own worth. He was an architect, actually, someone who appreciated her strength rather than feeling threatened by it." Arya studied the ring with professional appreciation for its design elements, while Hope examined the way the faceted diamond threw rainbow patterns across the bedroom ceiling. "It's beautiful," Arya said softly. "Beauty earned through adversity," Grace corrected. Constance could have accepted any number of marriage proposals after her first husband left. Instead, she waited until she found someone worthy of the woman she had become. Hope had discovered a collection of black and white photographs at the bottom of the box, images that captured decades of family history in formal poses and candid moments. Is this her? Hope asked, holding up a portrait of a woman in 1920s dress standing before an impressive stone building. That's Constance at the grand opening of her flagship hotel in Detroit, Grace confirmed. She was 43 years old and had just been featured on the cover of Business Weekly as one of America's most successful female entrepreneurs. She looks like Mama, Hope observed with startling accuracy. Grace studied the photograph with fresh eyes, noting similarities she had never consciously recognized. Both women possessed the same intelligent gaze, the same determined set of the jaw, the same aura of quiet strength that needed no external validation. She does, indeed, Grace agreed. The Lakeside legacy runs deeper than names or inherited jewelry. It's a legacy of resilience, intelligence, and the absolute refusal to accept less than we deserve. Arya fingered the pearls thoughtfully, feeling their weight against her palm. I've been thinking about something since yesterday, about whether I bear some responsibility for what happened with River, whether I was so focused on my career that I neglected our marriage. Grace's response was swift and decisive. That's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps women trapped in situations that diminish them. River made deliberate choices over a period of months. His actions were premeditated and calculated, as Bell's journal clearly demonstrates. You bear no responsibility for someone else's character defects. But maybe if I had been more attentive to what? Grace interrupted. To a man who was conducting clandestine meetings with another woman in your own home. To someone who was planning your emotional destruction while you recovered from surgery. Hope had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention she usually reserved for important life lessons. Daddy made bad choices, she said with devastating simplicity. You can't make good choices for other people. I learned that when Tommy Morrison kept cheating on spelling tests, even though I told him it was wrong. Grace smiled at her granddaughter's moral clarity. Exactly right. We are responsible for our own choices, not for managing other people's ethics. Besides, Hope continued, returning to the photographs, you work hard because you love building things that help people. The community center you designed has a playground where kids can have fun, and offices where grown-ups can get help with problems. That's good work. Arya felt something shift in her perspective as she listened to Hope's assessment. Through her daughter's eyes, her professional dedication appeared not as neglect of family, but as contribution to community, not as selfish ambition, but as meaningful service. Hope is absolutely right, Grace said, beginning to return items to the legacy box. Your architectural work has improved countless lives throughout Chicago. The cultural center renovation alone has provided space for hundreds of community events and educational programs. Maishu, I never thought about it that way, Arya admitted. Because you've been conditioned to view your success through the lens of traditional feminine guilt, Grace replied. River benefited enormously from your career, financially, socially, professionally. Yet somehow you've been made to feel guilty for the very achievements that elevated his lifestyle. Hope had discovered one final item in the legacy box, a small, leather-bound journal with blank pages, its cover stamped with the Lakeside family crest. What's this one for? That's for you to begin writing your own story, Grace said. Every woman in our family has kept a record of her journey, her challenges and her victories. Someday you'll add your own accomplishments to this collection. Hope opened the journal to the first pristine page, her expression growing thoughtful. Can I start now? I want to write about how we're taking care of each other. That sounds like an excellent first entry, Grace agreed. As Hope settled, at Arya's writing desk with the journal and her favorite purple pen, Grace continued the conversation in lowered tones. There's something else we need to discuss, the financial investigation. Financial investigation. Margaret Chen's team has been examining your joint accounts and River's business holdings. They've found some interesting irregularities that suggest Belle's involvement in this situation extends beyond personal relationships into potential professional misconduct. Arya felt her pulse quicken. What kind of irregularities? Payments from River's real estate company to Belle's interior design firm that significantly exceed reasonable compensation for the services documented. Hotel charges that coincide with out-of-town business trips where Belle was supposedly working on separate projects. Credit card expenditures for jewelry, clothing, and luxury items that appear to have been gifts. Grace paused to ensure Hope was absorbed in her writing before continuing. Margaret believes we have grounds to argue that River used marital assets to support an extramarital relationship, which could significantly impact property division proceedings. You mean Belle has been essentially funded by my income as well as River's? Precisely, which transforms this from a simple case of adultery into potential financial fraud, depending on how aggressively we choose to pursue various legal theories. Arya absorbed this information while watching Hope work diligently on her journal entry, her young face serious with concentration. I don't want this to become ugly, especially not for Hope's sake. It doesn't have to become ugly, Grace said, but it does need to become decisive. River and Belle planned this betrayal with considerable care. We owe it to ourselves to be equally strategic in our response. Hope looked up from her writing, her eyes bright with accomplishment. I wrote about how families can change shape but still be families. Like how our family used to be 4 people in one house, but now we're 3 people who are stronger together. Grace and Arya exchanged a look of amazement at Hope's emotional intelligence. Would you like to read it to us? Grace asked. Hope cleared her throat with the solemnity of someone delivering important information. Today, I learned that being a lakeside woman means you don't give up when bad things happen. You take care of each other and remember that you're part of something bigger than just yourself. Mama is sad about Daddy, but she's also smart and strong. Grandma Grace came to help us, which means we're lucky. I think we're going to be okay, even though everything is different now. As Hope's words settled into the morning quiet, Grace realized that the legacy box had served its purpose once again. Another generation of lakeside women was discovering her own strength, adding her voice to a chorus of resilience that stretched back nearly a century. The box would be passed down again someday, carrying Hope's story forward to daughters and granddaughters yet to be born, proof that the feminine legacy of strength, intelligence, and absolute refusal to settle for less than they deserved would continue long after River Northbrook became nothing more than a cautionary tale in family mythology. Chapter 6. The Gala of Truth. The Chicago Architecture Foundation's annual gala represented the pinnacle of the city's architectural and cultural social calendar, where the finest minds in design gathered to celebrate innovation, preservation, and the artistic vision that shaped one of America's most architecturally significant cities. Arya had been scheduled to receive the Foundation's Lifetime Achievement Award months before her marriage imploded, recognition for her 15-year career that had transformed Chicago's cultural landscape through projects ranging from the acclaimed renovation of the South Side Cultural Center to her innovative, affordable housing designs that balanced aesthetic beauty with practical functionality. Standing before her bedroom mirror in the lakefront mansion, Arya barely recognized the woman reflected back at her. The silver silk gown moved like liquid mercury around her frame, its bias-cut design emphasizing the natural elegance she had forgotten she possessed. Grace had insisted on this particular dress from a boutique on Michigan Avenue, rejecting Arya's instinct toward conservative black in favor of something that commanded attention rather than deflecting it. "You look like a queen," Hope announced. From her position on the bed, where she was putting finishing touches on her own outfit, Grace had arranged for Hope to attend the gala as Arya's guest, reasoning that the 10-year-old's presence would provide both moral support and a compelling visual narrative of family solidarity. Hope wore a miniature version of Arya's dress, in deep midnight blue, her hair arranged in an elegant chignon that made her appear startlingly mature. Around her neck she wore Constance Lakeside's pearl necklace, carefully shortened to accommodate her young frame. "We all look like queens," Grace corrected, emerging from the guest bathroom where she had been making final adjustments to her own appearance. At 62, Grace commanded attention in royal blue silk that complemented her silver hair and emphasized the regal bearing that had intimidated opposing counsel throughout her judicial career. The 3 generations of Lakeside women stood, together, before the full-length mirror, creating a portrait of feminine power that seemed to generate its own gravitational field. They looked like what they were, forces of nature temporarily contained in evening wear. "Are you nervous?" Hope asked, studying her mother's reflection with concern. "Terrified," Arya admitted honestly. "Everyone will know about River and Belle by now. Chicago's architectural community is small, and gossip travels faster than email." "Good," Grace said firmly. "Let them know. Let them see exactly how a Lakeside woman handles betrayal and public humiliation. Let them witness your grace under pressure." The limousine Grace had arranged arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, its driver helping them navigate their formal gowns into the luxury vehicle. As they drove through Chicago's glittering downtown toward the Art Institute, where the gala was being held, Hope pressed her face to the window with excitement. "Look at all the lights," she breathed. "It's like the whole city got dressed up for Mama's party." The Art Institute had been transformed for the evening, its neoclassical facade illuminated with dramatic lighting that emphasized the building's architectural significance. Red carpets stretched from the street to the entrance, lined with photographers and society reporters documenting the arrival of Chicago's cultural elite. "Remember," Grace said as their limousine approached the entrance, "we are not victims. We are not broken. We are Lakeside women attending an event to celebrate Arya's professional achievements. Everything else is merely background noise." The photographers immediately recognized Arya as she emerged from the limousine, their camera flashes creating a strobe effect that could have been overwhelming if not for the steadying presence of Grace on one side and Hope on the other. Questions were shouted from the press line, but the 3 women moved with coordinated dignity toward the entrance, acknowledging the cameras with gracious smiles while refusing to engage with intrusive inquiries. Inside the museum's Great Hall, the gala was already in full swing. Chicago's architectural establishment had gathered in impressive numbers, their formal attire creating a sophisticated backdrop for serious discussions about design, urban planning, and cultural preservation. Arya recognized colleagues, clients, and competitors throughout the room, noting how conversations seemed to pause as her family made their entrance. "Mrs. Northbrook," David Chen, the foundation's director, approached with obvious relief. "We weren't certain you would be able to attend, given your recent hospitalization." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Arya replied with a smile that suggested complete composure, despite the curiosity she could feel radiating from every corner of the room. "And you must be Mrs. Lakeside," David continued, shaking Grace's hand with appropriate deference to her judicial reputation. "The foundation is honored by your presence." "The honor is mine," Grace replied graciously. "I'm enormously proud of my daughter's achievements." Hope had been observing the gathering with the analytical attention she brought to all new social situations. "Everyone keeps looking at us," she whispered to Arya. "Because we're interesting," Arya whispered back. And because you look absolutely beautiful in that dress. The cocktail hour proceeded with surprising normalcy, as though Arya's personal crisis existed in a parallel universe that had no impact on professional networking and architectural discourse. Colleagues approached to offer congratulations. On her award, clients discussed upcoming projects, and several professors from the University of Chicago's architecture program expressed interest in having her speak to their students. It was during the transition to dinner that Belle Riverside made her entrance. She appeared in the great hall doorway, wearing white, an interesting choice that could be interpreted as either bridal optimism or provocative defiance. Her platinum, blonde hair had been arranged in an elaborate updo that showcased diamond earrings that caught the light with every movement of her head. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who believed herself to be the evening's most compelling figure. Hope spotted her first. "There's the blonde lady," she said quietly, her voice carrying no emotion beyond simple identification. Grace followed Hope's gaze and immediately understood the strategic implications of Belle's appearance. "She wants to make a scene," Grace murmured to Arya. "She's planning to announce something publicly, probably during your award presentation." How can you tell?" "Body language, timing, choice of venue," Grace replied with the analytical precision of someone who had spent decades reading human behavior in high-stakes situations. "She's not here for the architecture. She's here for the audience." Belle had indeed begun moving purposefully through the crowd, pausing for conversations that seemed designed to position her within sightlines of the main podium. She carried herself with the bearing of someone preparing to make an announcement, her interactions with other guests brief but calculated to maximize attention. "What do we do?" Arya asked, feeling her composure begin to waver for the first time since entering the gala. Hope tugged on Arya's sleeve, her 10-year-old face serious with purpose. "Can I borrow your phone for a minute? I want to show you something." Confused but trusting her daughter's instincts, Arya handed over her phone. Hope navigated to the voice recording app with the familiarity of someone who had grown up with technology, scrolling through several files before finding the one she wanted. "I recorded Belle when she came to our house last week," Hope said quietly, "while you were at the doctor, and Daddy thought I was taking a nap upstairs. I thought it might be important someday." Grace leaned closer, her expression growing sharp with interest. "What kind of recording?" Hope pressed play on a file labeled with last week's date. Belle's voice emerged clearly from the phone's speaker, though Hope had lowered the volume to ensure their conversation remained private. "This is almost too easy, River. She's so pathetically grateful for every crumb of attention you throw her way. Thank you for the roses, darling. Thank you for thinking of me while I was in the hospital. It's nauseating how little self-respect she has." River's voice followed, though his words were less distinct. "She's a good mother to Hope." "Hope will be fine," Belle's voice cut through with casual cruelty. "Children adapt to new situations quickly, especially when the new situation involves a significant upgrade in maternal figure, someone who actually understands how to navigate society instead of hiding behind blueprints and building projects." The recording continued for several more minutes, capturing Belle's detailed plans for the evening's announcement, her dismissive comments about Arya's professional achievements, and her certainty that Chicago's social elite would welcome her as River's new partner once the transition became official. "She's planning to announce her pregnancy tonight," Hope whispered as the recording ended. "During your speech, she thinks it will make everyone feel sorry for her and angry at you." Grace and Arya exchanged a look that conveyed both horror and admiration for Hope's foresight in documenting the conversation. "That recording changes everything," Grace said quietly. Belle has just provided us with evidence of calculated emotional cruelty and deliberate timing designed to maximize public humiliation. Before they could discuss strategy further, David Chen approached their table with the evening's program. In hand, Mrs. Northbrook, we're ready to begin the award presentations. You'll be our final honoree, which means you'll have the stage for the last 15 minutes of the evening. As David moved away to coordinate with the technical crew, Grace leaned closer to her daughter and granddaughter. Hope, sweetheart, how would you feel about helping your mother accept her award? What do you mean? Grace's smile carried edges sharp enough to cut glass. I mean that sometimes the best way to handle someone who plans to ambush you is to ambush them first. Hope's eyes lit up with understanding and excitement. You want me to play the recording? Only if you're comfortable with it, Arya said, though her voice carried new strength as she began to understand Grace's strategy. It would mean standing up in front of all these people and dealing with whatever happens afterward. Hope considered this responsibility with the seriousness she brought to all important decisions. Belle said mean things about our family, and she was going to be mean to you in front of everyone tonight. I think people should know who she really is. Grace reached across the table to squeeze Hope's small hand. You don't have to decide right now, but if you choose to help us, we'll be right there with you every step of the way. As dinner service began and the evening's program commenced with the presentation of Architectural Preservation Awards, the three lakeside women continued refining their strategy. Belle had positioned herself at a table near the front of the room, her white dress creating a focal point that seemed to draw attention even during other speakers' presentations. But Belle had made a crucial miscalculation in her strategic planning. She had underestimated the intelligence, preparedness, and absolute refusal to be victims that characterized the women she was attempting to destroy. The evening was about to take a turn that would transform Belle's moment of anticipated triumph into a masterclass in how powerful women handle attempted humiliation. And at the center of it all, a 10-year-old girl was about to demonstrate that the lakeside legacy of strength, intelligence, and devastating precision in the face of adversity had successfully transferred to its newest generation. Chapter 7. The morning after victory. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the lakefront mansion's breakfast room, illuminating newspaper headlines spread across the antique walnut table like evidence of a particularly satisfying victory. Architecture Iris exposes marriage wrecker at gala, read the Chicago Tribune's front page, complete with a photograph that captured the exact moment Hope had stepped to the podium microphone the previous evening. The Chicago Sun-Times had opted for Child's Courage Stops Gold Diggers scheme, while the society pages of various publications featured images of the three lakeside women standing together in their formal gowns, presenting a united front that had clearly captivated the city's imagination. Grace sat at the head of the table, still elegant in her silk robe and slippers, reading selected quotes aloud while Hope ate French toast and Arya nursed her second cup of coffee. Listen to this from the Tribune's society columnist. In 30 years of covering Chicago's cultural elite, I have never witnessed such a masterful demonstration of grace under pressure. The lakeside women transformed what could have been a humiliating public spectacle into a triumph of dignity and truth. Hope giggled, syrup decorating her chin as she studied a photograph of herself speaking into the microphone. I look so serious, like I'm giving a really important speech. You were giving a really important speech, Arya said, still marveling at her daughter's composure during the previous evening's events. You handled yourself like a true professional. The gala had concluded with standing ovations, not only for Aria's architectural achievements, but for the family's handling of Belle's attempted sabotage. Belle herself had fled the Art Institute shortly after Hope's recording played throughout the Great Hall, her white dress a streak of movement. As she pushed through the crowd toward the exit, her planned pregnancy announcement had been completely derailed by the exposure of her cruel calculations. River had not attended the gala at all, an absence that the newspapers had noted with particular interest. Several articles speculated about his whereabouts and his response to the evening's revelations, though none had succeeded in obtaining comment from either River or Belle. Later investigation would reveal that Belle's pregnancy claims were fabricated, another manipulation tactic in her calculated destruction of the Northbrook marriage. "Margaret Chen called while you were in the shower," Grace announced, setting down the Tribune to focus on her breakfast. The recording Hope made, combined with Belle's journal and the financial irregularities, has significantly strengthened our negotiating position. River's attorney contacted her office at 7 this morning, requesting an emergency meeting. "What does that mean?" Aria asked. "It means River has realized that his situation has become untenable," Grace replied with satisfaction. "Public opinion, legal evidence, and financial exposure have converged to create circumstances that require immediate damage control." Hope had moved on to examining the photographs in the society pages with artistic interest. Why does Belle always look angry? In pictures, even when she's trying to smile, her eyes look mad. Aria studied the images Hope was referencing, noting that her daughter had identified something she herself had missed. In every photograph taken over the past 6 months, where Belle appeared at River's side during business events, there was indeed something predatory in her expression, something calculating that the camera had captured despite her attempts at social grace. "Some people wear masks that don't quite fit," Grace explained gently. "Their real feelings show through despite their efforts to hide them. Like when Tommy Morrison pretends to be sorry for cheating on tests. But you can tell he's only sorry he got caught," Hope said with devastating accuracy. "Exactly like that," Grace agreed. The telephone rang, interrupting their breakfast analysis of the previous evening's triumph. Grace answered with the authoritative tone she had perfected during her judicial career. "Lakeside residence. Yes, she's here, but she's not taking calls from reporters today. No, Mr. Northbrook is not available for comment because he doesn't live here anymore. Thank you for your interest in the story." Grace hung up and immediately unplugged the phone from the wall. "That's the 7th call in the past hour. The story has attracted more attention than anticipated." "Is that good or bad?" Hope asked. I'm powerful," Grace replied, "and power can be directed toward good outcomes if managed properly." Before anyone could respond, the doorbell chimed with the melodious notes that announced visitors to the lakefront mansion. Grace moved to the front window and peered through the curtains, her expression growing amused. "It appears we have a delivery," she announced. "Several deliveries, actually." The front porch had been transformed into a florist's showcase with arrangements ranging from simple bouquets to elaborate installations that suggested considerable expense. Cards and envelopes were attached to each arrangement, creating a paper garden among the flowers. Hope pressed her nose to the window with excitement. "It's like Christmas morning, but with flowers instead of presents." They spent the next hour collecting and arranging the deliveries throughout the house, reading messages of support that ranged from professional colleagues congratulating Aria on her award to perfect strangers expressing admiration for the family's dignity during crisis. A particularly impressive arrangement of white orchids came, with a card from the Art Institute's board of directors, thanking Aria for her years of service and expressing hopes for continued collaboration. Another delivery, featuring 36 pink roses, included a note from the Illinois chapter of Women in Architecture, inviting Aria to speak at their annual conference about balancing professional achievement with personal challenges. "This one's my favorite," Hope announced, holding up a card attached to a modest bouquet of wildflowers. "It's from Mrs. Patterson next door. She says she's proud to live next to the strongest women in Chicago." Grace had been organizing the cards into categories, her legal mind automatically cataloging the support network that had emerged overnight. "These aren't just congratulations," she observed. "They're professional opportunities, social invitations, and strategic alliances. People want to be associated with the lakeside legacy." "Why?" Aria asked, genuinely puzzled by the overwhelming response. "Because you demonstrated something rare in contemporary culture," Grace replied. "You showed that it's possible to respond to betrayal with dignity rather than vengeance, strength rather than victimhood, intelligence rather than emotion." Hope had discovered another category of mail among the deliveries: invitations to events, speaking engagements, and professional consultations that suggested Aria's career prospects had been enhanced rather than damaged by the previous evening's revelations. "Look," Hope said, holding up an elegant envelope embossed with the logo of Northwestern University's architecture school. "They want you to be a visiting professor." Aria opened the letter with growing amazement. The invitation was indeed for a prestigious teaching position, one that would allow her to maintain her private practice while sharing her expertise with the next generation of architects. The salary offered was significantly higher than she had been earning from her previous firm. "This is extraordinary," Aria murmured, reading the terms of the offer. "They're essentially offering me everything I've ever wanted in terms of professional development." "Success attracts success," Grace observed. "Yesterday's events demonstrated your character under pressure, which is exactly what institutions value in their leadership." As they continued processing the morning's deliveries, a pattern began to emerge. Aria's professional stock had risen dramatically as a result of handling personal crisis with public grace. The architecture community had rallied around her not as a victim requiring sympathy, but as a leader worthy of respect and emulation. Hope had claimed the dining room table as her headquarters for organizing cards and invitations by category. "We should keep all of these," she announced with 10-year-old certainty. "Someday, when I'm grown up, I want to remember how brave Mama was." Grace and Aria exchanged a look of profound understanding. Hope was not simply processing the immediate crisis, but creating narrative framework that would shape her understanding of feminine strength throughout her life. The child was learning that women could transform betrayal into triumph, humiliation into empowerment, endings into new beginnings. "You know what I think we should do today?" Grace said, surveying the flower-filled rooms and the evidence of community support surrounding them. "What?" Hope asked, looking up from her organizational project. "I think we should plan something beautiful," Grace replied. "Something that celebrates who we are and what we've accomplished. Something that marks this as the beginning of our new chapter, rather than the end of the old one." Aria felt something shift in her chest, a lightness she had not experienced since before her. Marriage began to deteriorate. "What did you have in mind?" Grace's smile carried the promise of adventures yet to be undertaken. "I was thinking we might redesign this house to reflect our actual lives rather than the life we thought we were supposed to want. Remove everything that doesn't serve our purposes, add everything that does, and create a space that belongs entirely to the three of us." Hope's face lit up with enthusiasm, like architectural therapy. Exactly like architectural therapy, Grace confirmed. Your mother has spent years designing spaces for other people's dreams. It's time she designed something for her own. As the three women began walking through their home with new eyes, seeing it not as a stage set for traditional family life, but as raw material for whatever they chose to create, Arya realized that Belle's betrayal had given her an unexpected gift. Freedom to become exactly who she was meant to be, surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally and supported her unlimited potential for growth, success, and happiness that owed nothing to any man's approval or presence. The morning after victory felt like the first day of the rest of their extraordinary lives. Chapter 8: The Fortress of Love. 3 weeks had transformed the lakefront mansion into something entirely new, though the changes were subtle enough that casual observers might have struggled to identify what made the house feel so different. The formal dining room, which had hosted stiff dinner parties designed to advance River's business connections, now served as Hope's art studio, its north-facing windows providing perfect light for her watercolor projects and architectural sketches. The sterile home office that River had used for late-night phone calls with clients had become Grace's legal consulting space, where she worked on pro bono cases for women navigating their own divorces. Arya had claimed the master suite's sitting area as her design studio, spreading architectural plans across surfaces that had once held River's business magazines and golf trophies. The room felt lighter somehow, its proportions more pleasing now that they served her purposes rather than accommodating his preferences. But the most significant change was intangible. The house had become a home in ways it had never achieved during 13 years of traditional family structure. Laughter echoed through rooms that had previously maintained library-quiet formality. The kitchen stayed warm, with constant cooking projects that Hope and Grace undertook together. Music played throughout the day, everything from jazz standards that Grace preferred to the classical pieces that helped Arya focus on complex design problems. "It's like the house was holding its breath before," Hope observed as she worked on a watercolor painting of the lake view from her new studio. "Now, it can breathe properly." Grace looked up from the legal brief she was reviewing, smiling at her granddaughter's poetic assessment. Houses reflect the emotional state of their inhabitants. When people are unhappy, homes feel constrained. When people are thriving, homes feel expansive. Arya had been working on preliminary sketches for the Northwestern University project when her phone rang with a call from Margaret Chen. After 3 weeks of negotiations, River's legal team had finally submitted their first formal settlement proposal. "You need to see this in person," Margaret said without preamble. "Can you come to my office this afternoon? And you might want to bring Grace." 2 hours later, Arya and Grace sat in Margaret Chen's conference room, studying documents that revealed the full scope of River's desperate legal position. The settlement offer was so favorable to Arya that Margaret had asked her associate to review the numbers twice before scheduling the meeting. "He's offering the house full custody of Hope with generous visitation rights for him, 60% of all joint assets, and continuation of spousal support for 7 years, Margaret summarized. "In exchange, he's asking only that you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the circumstances of your separation." "What does the non-disclosure agreement actually mean?" Grace asked, her judicial experience immediately identifying the strategic implications. "It means Arya couldn't discuss the details of River's affair, Belle's behavior, or any related financial irregularities in public forums, media interviews, or professional settings," Margaret explained. "Essentially, it would prevent her from telling her story if opportunities arose." Arya studied the settlement terms while considering their practical impact. The financial arrangements would provide security for Hope's education and her own future. professional endeavors. The custody agreement acknowledged what had already become their natural living arrangement. Even the non-disclosure clause was more nuanced than she had expected. "What's driving this generosity?" Arya asked. 3 weeks ago, River was suggesting 50-50 division of everything. Margaret's smile carried satisfaction at having anticipated this question. Bell Riverside filed a civil lawsuit against River's company yesterday, alleging sexual harassment, hostile work environment, and financial misconduct. She's claiming that he used his position of power to coerce her into a personal relationship, then abandoned her when it became professionally inconvenient. Grace leaned back in her chair, processing this development with the analytical precision that had made her an exceptional jurist. She's repositioning herself from mistress to victim. Precisely, and her attorney is quite skilled at generating media attention. River's business reputation, which survived your separation relatively intact, is now facing serious threats from multiple directions. Arya felt an unexpected surge of something that might have been sympathy for her estranged husband, followed immediately by recognition that this emotion was both inappropriate and potentially damaging to her own interests. "What's your recommendation?" she asked Margaret. "Accept the settlement with one modification," Margaret replied without hesitation. "Remove the non-disclosure agreement entirely. River needs this resolution more than you do, and your silence shouldn't be purchased when it's his actions that created the situation requiring discretion." Grace nodded approvingly. "Margaret's right. You have nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to hide. If River wants to avoid public discussion of his behavior, he can accomplish that by behaving better, not by silencing the people he's harmed." They spent another hour reviewing details and discussing implementation timelines before returning to the lakefront mansion, where Hope was waiting with excitement that could barely be contained. Mrs. Patterson came over with mail that got delivered to her house by mistake, Hope announced, leading them toward the kitchen, where several packages sat on the counter. And someone called about a magazine, wanting to interview Mama. Arya examined the packages while Grace fielded phone calls that had accumulated during their absence. The packages contained advance copies of Architectural Digest, which featured Arya's Cultural Center renovation as their cover story, and Chicago Magazine, which had named her to their 40 under 40 list, despite the fact that she had recently turned 35. "This is incredible timing," Arya murmured, studying the Architectural Digest cover, which showcased her work with the kind of reverential photography usually reserved for European landmarks. Hope peered over her mother's shoulder at the magazine coverage. "You're famous, like actually famous. Your mother has always been respected in professional circles," Grace corrected gently, "but recent events have brought her talents to broader public attention." The phone rang again, and Grace answered with her now familiar screening protocol. After a brief conversation, she hung up and turned to Arya with an expression of barely contained excitement. "That was David Chen from the Architecture Foundation. They've received an inquiry from the Smithsonian Institution about featuring your Cultural Center renovation in their upcoming exhibition on contemporary American public architecture." "The Smithsonian?" Arya repeated, certain she had misheard. "The Smithsonian," Grace confirmed. "Apparently yesterday's New York Times architecture critic wrote a piece about the Chicago Renaissance in public space design, using your work as the primary example." Hope had been listening to this conversation with growing understanding of its significance. "This is all because people know about us now, isn't it? Because of what happened at the gala." Grace and Arya exchanged a look that acknowledged Hope's astute analysis. The crisis that had shattered their family structure had simultaneously elevated Arya's professional profile in ways that decades of traditional career advancement might never have achieved. "Sometimes," Grace said carefully. Difficult situations force us into visibility that reveals capabilities we had been hiding, even from ourselves. As evening approached and they prepared dinner together in the kitchen that had become the heart of their reconstituted family life, Arya found herself considering the settlement offer from a perspective that had nothing to do with financial security or legal strategy. River was offering her freedom from a marriage that had constrained her potential, custody of a daughter who brought joy to every day, and financial independence that would allow her to pursue architectural projects based on passion rather than economic necessity. In exchange, he was asking for nothing more than the silence that she had already been providing out of consideration for Hope's emotional well-being. "I'm going to accept the settlement," she announced as they sat down to dinner. But without the non-disclosure agreement. Hope looked up from her plate with curiosity. "What does that mean?" "It means that your father and I will be officially divorced. You and I will continue living here together with Grandma Grace, and I'll be free to make whatever professional choices seem best without considering his preferences or opinions. Will you be happier?" Hope asked, with the directness that had become her trademark during this period of family transition. Arya considered the question seriously, studying the faces of the two women who had supported her through the most challenging period of her adult life. Grace, whose wisdom and strength had provided scaffolding for Arya's recovery. Hope, whose resilience and emotional intelligence had transformed a family crisis into an opportunity for deeper connection. "I think I already am happier," Arya said honestly. "I think I have been for weeks, but I was afraid to admit it because it seemed wrong to find joy in the middle of loss." Grace reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Joy isn't disloyal to grief. Sometimes they exist simultaneously, teaching us that human experience is more complex than simple." Narratives allow. As they finished dinner and moved to the living room for their evening routine of reading, architectural planning, and family conversation, Arya realized that the fortress of love they had built together was more secure than any marriage had ever been. Tomorrow, she would call Margaret Chen and accept River's settlement offer. Tomorrow, she would begin the administrative process of ending her marriage and formalizing the life she had already begun building. But tonight, she would simply enjoy the company of the two women who had taught her that strength multiplied when shared, that love deepened when tested, and that the most authentic family structures were those chosen rather than inherited. The fortress of love they had created would stand long after River Northbrook had become nothing more than a chapter in their family story, proof that the lakeside legacy of feminine resilience had successfully transferred to its newest generation. Chapter 9. The Breaking Point. The first snow of winter was falling gently outside the lakefront mansion when River Northbrook finally returned to confront the ruins of his former life. Arya discovered him through the kitchen window at 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening in early December, standing motionless in the circular driveway beside his silver Porsche. Snow collected on his shoulders and in his dark hair as he stared at the house with the expression of someone trying to reconcile memory with reality. "Mama," Hope said quietly, appearing at Arya's elbow with her homework folder. "Daddy's outside." But through the window, they could see that River had lost weight during the 4 months since their separation began. His expensive overcoat hung loosely on his frame, and his face carried the gaunt quality of someone who had been surviving on stress rather than proper nutrition. Even from a distance, his emotional exhaustion was evident in the defeated slope of his shoulders. Grace emerged from her makeshift legal office with a stack of case files, immediately assessing the situation with judicial precision. "He looks terrible," she observed without sympathy. The Bell situation must have deteriorated significantly. Margaret Chen had kept them informed of River's legal complications through regular updates that read like chapters in a cautionary tale about the consequences of poor decision-making. Bell's sexual harassment lawsuit had attracted attention from employment law specialists who saw her case as a vehicle for establishing new precedents regarding power dynamics in professional relationships. Her fabricated pregnancy claims, exposed during the gala, had further damaged her credibility but intensified her legal attacks against River. River's business had lost several major clients who preferred to avoid association with ongoing litigation. His personal reputation in Chicago's tight-knit real estate community had suffered damage that might prove irreparable. "Should I go talk to him?" Arya asked, though her voice suggested reluctance rather than eagerness. "Only if you want to," Grace replied. "You have no obligation to provide comfort to someone who created his own problems through deliberate betrayal." Hope had moved to the front window for a better view of her father's solitary vigil in the snow. "He looks sad," she said with the complicated sympathy that children often felt for adults who had disappointed them. Arya studied her daughter's profile, noting the absence of excitement or joy that Hope had once displayed when River returned from business trips. The 10-year-old had adapted to her new family structure with remarkable resilience, but she had also developed a more realistic assessment of her father's character that would influence their relationship permanently. The doorbell chimed with its familiar melody, followed by River's voice calling through the heavy oak door. "Arya, I know you're home. I can see lights on and your car is in the garage." Grace moved to the security system panel and activated the intercom. "Mr. Northbrook, this is Grace Lakeside. What is the purpose of your visit?" River's voice carried clearly through the speaker system, though his words were difficult to distinguish through what sounded like tears. "I need to talk to Arya and Hope, please. I need to explain." Grace looked to Arya for direction, her finger poised over the button that would unlock the front door. "Your choice entirely." Arya considered the strategic implications of allowing River into their sanctuary. The house had become a space of healing and growth, carefully protected from external stress or emotional manipulation. Yet Hope deserved the opportunity to hear whatever her father needed to say, and Arya herself felt curious about the circumstances that had reduced him to this desperate state. "5 minutes," she said to Grace. "We'll talk in the formal living room, and he leaves when we say the conversation is over." Grace nodded and activated the door release. "Mr. Northbrook, you have 5 minutes. Please remove your shoes and coat in the foyer." River entered, looking like a refugee from his former life, his expensive clothes rumpled and his usually perfect grooming replaced by the disheveled appearance of someone who had stopped caring about external presentation. Snow melted from his hair onto the marble floor as he fumbled with coat buttons using hands that shook slightly. Hope approached her father with careful reserve, accepting his awkward hug, but not returning it with her former enthusiasm. "Hi, Daddy, are you okay?" "I've been better, sweetheart," River said, his voice breaking on the endearment. "How are you? How's school?" "Good. I'm getting straight A's, and my art teacher says I might be ready for advanced classes next year." Hope's response was polite, but distant, as though she were speaking to a friendly acquaintance rather than a parent. They moved to the formal living room, where River settled onto the sofa that faced the window overlooking Lake Michigan. The room felt different with his presence, smaller somehow, as though his emotional turmoil was consuming oxygen. "Thank you for seeing me," he began, addressing Arya with the formality of someone who no longer assumed the right to casual interaction. "I know I have no right to be here, no right to ask for your time or attention." "What do you want, River?" Arya asked, settling into the chair that provided maximum distance from the sofa while allowing her to monitor Hope's reactions. River looked between his wife and daughter, his expression carrying the desperate quality of someone attempting to communicate across an impossible divide. Belle filed criminal charges against me yesterday. Theft, fraud, sexual coercion. Her attorney thinks they can make a case for racketeering, based on how I use company resources to support our relationship. Grace leaned forward with professional interest. Criminal charges require evidence of specific illegal activities. What exactly is she alleging? Everything, River said, his voice barely above a whisper. Every gift I bought her. Every business trip where she accompanied me, every hotel room, every piece of jewelry, every professional opportunity I created for her company. She's claiming that all of it constituted illegal use of marital assets and corporate funds. Hope had been listening to this conversation with the focused attention she brought to adult discussions that might affect her world. Is Belle trying to get you in trouble with the police? River turned to his daughter with eyes that seemed much older than his 38 years. Yes, sweetheart. Belle is very angry that our relationship ended, and she's trying to punish me by claiming that I forced her to be with me. But you chose to be with her, Hope said with devastating 10-year-old logic. Nobody made you. The words hit River like physical blows, causing him to flinch visibly. You're absolutely right, Hope. I made terrible choices, and now I'm facing the consequences. Arya watched this exchange with growing recognition that River's appearance at their home was motivated by desperation rather than remorse. What do you want from us, River? Are you looking for sympathy, character witnesses, financial support for legal fees? I want my family back, River said, the words emerging in a rush of emotion that had been building throughout their conversation. I want to come home. I want to fix this. The silence that followed stretched taut as a wire. Grace studied River with the analytical attention she had once applied to defendants in her courtroom. Hope examined her fingernails with sudden fascination. Arya felt something that might have been pity, followed immediately by recognition that pity was not the same as love or forgiveness. You can't fix this, Arya said quietly. You can't unmake the choices you made, undo the damage you caused, or restore the trust you destroyed. I can try, River insisted. I can spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I did. Hope looked up from her nail examination with the expression she wore when solving complex math problems. Daddy, why did you choose Belle instead of us? River's response required several attempts before words emerged coherently. I thought she understood me better. I thought she wanted the same things I wanted. What things? Hope pressed with relentless 10-year-old curiosity. Success, recognition, advancement in society. Things that seemed important at the time, Hope considered this explanation with visible skepticism. Mama has success and recognition. Her picture was on the cover of magazines, and important people want her to speak at universities. She's way more successful than Belle. I know that now, River said. I didn't appreciate what I had until I lost it. Grace had been observing this conversation with growing impatience for River's self-centered perspective. Mr. Northbrook, you didn't lose anything. You made deliberate choices to abandon your family in favor of someone who appeared to offer easier access to status and pleasure. The fact that your strategy backfired doesn't transform your betrayal into tragic loss. River turned to Grace with the desperation of someone drowning in consequences of his own making. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I love Arya and Hope. I love this family. Love is demonstrated through actions, not declared through words, Grace replied with judicial authority. Your actions over the past year demonstrated priorities that had nothing to do with family welfare. Hope had been processing this adult conversation with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. Daddy, do you love Belle now, or do you just hate that she's being mean to you? The question hit its target with surgical precision. River struggled visibly with an honest response, his face cycling through emotions before settling on something resembling resignation. I don't think I ever loved Belle, he admitted. I think I loved how she made me feel about myself, important, powerful, desired by someone beautiful and sophisticated. But you are important and powerful, Hope said with confusion. You have a big company and lots of people work for you, and you make buildings happen. River's smile carried no warmth, only bitter recognition of truth he had been avoiding. Apparently, I needed someone else to tell me that before I could believe it myself. Arya felt the final pieces of her emotional attachment to River dissolve as she listened to his explanation. She had spent 13 years married to a man whose sense of self-worth required constant external validation, whose need for reflected glory had ultimately overpowered his capacity for loyalty or commitment. I think you should leave now, she said gently but firmly. We're not the solution to your problems, River. We never were. River's composure finally cracked completely, tears flowing freely as he looked around the living room that had once been his sanctuary. I've lost everything. My business, my reputation, my family. Belle was right about one thing. I am weak. Too weak to appreciate what I had. Too weak to resist temptation. Too weak to face consequences like a man. Hope surprised everyone by rising from her chair and approaching her father with determined purpose. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small drawing she had been working on during art class, a watercolor portrait of their family that included only 3 figures, herself, Arya, and Grace. Daddy, she said, offering him the drawing, you didn't lose us. You gave us away. But we're okay without you. We're actually better. The drawing remained in Hope's outstretched hand as River stared at it through tears, unable to accept visual proof of his irrelevance to their reconstructed family structure. Grace stood with the authority that had commanded respect in federal courtrooms across the Midwest. Mr. Northbrook, I believe this conversation has reached its natural conclusion. My granddaughter has school tomorrow, and we have evening routines to maintain. River rose unsteadily, his expensive shoes squelching slightly from melted snow. He looked around the living room one final time, as though memorizing details of a life he would never reclaim. If you ever need anything, he said to Arya, any kind of help or support, please know that I'll always— We won't, Arya interrupted, quietly. But thank you for the offer. As Grace escorted River to the front door and activated the security system behind him, Hope settled onto the sofa beside her mother with the contentment of someone whose world had been confirmed rather than disrupted. I feel sorry for him, Hope said thoughtfully, but not sorry enough to want him to come back. Arya gathered her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of Hope's shampoo and the lingering traces of watercolor paint that always seemed to cling to her clothes. That's a very mature way to think about it, Arya said. You can feel compassion for someone without wanting them to be part of your daily life. Through the window, they watched River's Porsche disappear into the swirling snow, its taillights growing smaller until they merged with the city lights beyond. Do you think he'll be okay? Hope asked. Grace rejoined them in the living room, settling into her preferred chair with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully defended her territory. Mr. Northbrook will survive his current difficulties and probably learn valuable lessons about character and consequences, but his well-being is no longer our responsibility. As they prepared for their evening routines in the house that had become their sanctuary, Arya realized that River's visit had provided unexpected closure. She had seen him clearly for the first time, not as the husband she had loved or the father Hope deserved, but as a man whose fundamental weaknesses had made their marriage unsustainable long before Belle Riverside appeared. The breaking point had finally arrived, not with dramatic confrontation or emotional devastation, but with quiet recognition that some things, once broken, were meant to stay that way. Their fortress of love remained secure, strengthened rather than threatened by River's desperate attempt to reclaim what he had voluntarily abandoned. The lakeside legacy would continue without him, carried forward by 3 generations of women who had learned that true strength came not from being chosen by unworthy men, but from choosing themselves and each other with unwavering commitment. Chapter 10. The Toughest Reunion. Spring arrived early in Chicago that year, bringing renewal to the lakefront mansion's gardens and the lives of its inhabitants. Aria knelt among the rose bushes, deadheading spent blooms, while Hope painted nearby and Grace reviewed legal documents at the wrought iron table under the pergola. 4 months had passed since River's desperate appearance in their snow-covered driveway, and the divorce proceedings neared completion. River's legal troubles with Belle had escalated throughout winter, forcing him to liquidate most holdings to satisfy her financial demands after her fabricated pregnancy claims were exposed. Mrs. Northbrook, James Morrison, Margaret Chen's associate, arrived looking unusually troubled. River has requested a final meeting before the divorce becomes official. He wants to make what he calls a final appeal for alternative arrangements. Grace's expression sharpened. What kind of alternative arrangements? Reconciliation terms, full acknowledgement of fault, marriage counseling, relocation away from Chicago to start fresh. Hope looked up from her watercolor without excitement. Why would we want to start fresh somewhere else? We like our life here. Our painful memories are about him, not about Chicago, Hope replied with devastating logic. Moving wouldn't change what he did. After reviewing River's proposal, which essentially offered him a junior partnership in his own marriage, Aria declined. James, please tell River we'll proceed with finalizing the divorce as planned. Can I say something to Daddy before you... Tell him no, Hope asked. I think he deserves to understand why we can't be a family again. Despite concerns about exposing Hope to potential confrontation, they arranged a supervised meeting in Margaret Chen's conference room. 2 days later, River arrived perfectly groomed, projecting stability despite his circumstances. Hope entered wearing her purple dress and Constance's pearl necklace, carrying herself with remarkable dignity. "Hello, Daddy," she said, accepting his hug with polite reserve. They settled around the conference table with Hope positioned between Aria and Grace. "Daddy, I love you because you're my father, and that will never change," Hope began, causing River's composure to crack immediately. "But loving someone doesn't mean you have to live with them if they make choices that hurt your family. You chose Belle instead of Mama and me. You chose her for a long time, not just once, by accident. Hope, I know I made terrible mistakes." "It wasn't a mistake," Hope interrupted firmly. "Mistakes happen when you don't know better. You knew Belle was trying to take you away from us, and you let her do it anyway." And River's composure dissolved completely. "You're right. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I did it anyway. That's why we can't be a family again, Daddy. Not because we don't love you, but because we can't trust you to choose us when something prettier comes along." What can I do to prove I would never make those choices again?" River asked desperately. Hope considered carefully. "I don't think you can prove that, Daddy. You have to prove it to yourself first, and that might take a really long time, but we can't wait around wondering if you're going to change, because we need to live our lives now." When River asked about rebuilding their relationship gradually, Hope replied thoughtfully, "You could try that. But you should know that Mama is happier now than when you lived with us. And I am too. Even if you become a better person, that doesn't mean we'll want to change our family back." River absorbed this with visible pain, finally understanding that his daughter's love didn't automatically translate into desire for his return. "I understand," he whispered. "I think I finally understand." Hope smiled for the first time. "You can be proud of me, Daddy, and I can be proud of you too, if you make good choices going forward." When he asked what good choices looked like, Hope replied seriously, "Getting help for why you needed Belle to make you feel important, learning to be happy by yourself before trying to be with someone else, and maybe helping other people who made similar mistakes." As the meeting concluded, Hope retrieved a folded watercolor from her purse. "I made this for you." The painting showed their family positioned to suggest separate but connected lives, River apart from the three women, but still within the same frame. "It's how we are now," Hope explained. "Not together, but not completely separate either. You're still my daddy, but you don't live in our house anymore." River studied the painting through tears. "It's beautiful, Hope. It's perfect." Driving home afterward, Hope reflected quietly, "That was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I'm glad I did it. Now Daddy knows the truth, and we know he understands it." Grace smiled at her granddaughter's wisdom. "You handled that with remarkable grace, Hope." "I learned from watching you and Mama," Hope said. "You taught me that you can love people without letting them hurt you, and that you can forgive people without trusting them again." The toughest reunion had occurred through honest conversation that acknowledged both love and necessary separation. Hope had given her father truth delivered with compassion, explaining why their family couldn't return to its original form while leaving space for new relationships to develop. River had lost his chance to be the center of their world, but gained something potentially more valuable, a daughter who would always love him enough to tell him the truth. As they turned into their driveway, spring flowers bloomed against the limestone facade, welcoming them home to the sanctuary where 3 generations of lakeside women had learned that the greatest love stories weren't always about romance, but about unbreakable bonds between mothers and daughters who refused to accept less than they deserved. The lakeside legacy lived on, stronger than ever, and their greatest love story was just beginning. Epilogue. 5 years later, the lakefront mansion hosted a celebration that would have been unimaginable during the dark autumn when River's betrayal first shattered the Northbrook family structure. Hope Northbrook, now 15 and already accepted into Northwestern University's early admission program for gifted students, stood before a gathering of Chicago's architectural elite to present her mother with the American Institute of Architects Gold Medal, the profession's highest honor. Aria Lakeside had transformed her personal crisis into professional triumph, establishing the Lakeside Foundation for Women in Architecture, which provided scholarships and mentorship for young women. Entering the field, Grace Lakeside, now 67 and serving as senior counsel to 3 of Chicago's most prestigious law firms, watched with profound satisfaction as her granddaughter delivered a speech about resilience, family legacy, and the power of women who refuse to accept limitations imposed by others' failures. River attended the ceremony as an invited guest, having spent 5 years rebuilding his character through therapy and community service, maintaining a respectful relationship with his daughter while understanding that his role in their lives would always be secondary to the unbreakable bond between the 3 generations of lakeside women who had discovered that their greatest love story was not about romance, but about the enduring strength that emerges when extraordinary women choose to support each other unconditionally.